Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
You're too set in your ways. We need flexibility. That's what Carl Bennett said to me, sitting there in his spotless, Scandinavian-designed corner office with the sun cutting across his desk like it belonged to a better man. He even had the gall to smile when he said it, like it was some kind of compliment wrapped in a cheap corporate buzzword blanket. I didn't flinch. I nodded, reached across that desk, shook his hand like a man does when he knows it's over, and walked the hell out without saying a word. No argument. No scene. Just quiet dignity, the kind that's earned the hard way. Over 12 years of blood and caffeine and weekends lost to code and system logs. Let me rewind for a second and paint you a picture. I'm Dan Keller, 54 years old, divorced. No kids, but a niece I spoil rotten on holidays. I'd been at Atticus Systems since it was a dozen people in a damp sublease downtown, when Carl was still selling ad space for a local news blog and pretending he was going to start the next Facebook. I was the guy they called at 2 in the morning when something broke and no one else could fix it. The guy who patched code that should have been rewritten years ago because leadership kept pushing deadlines instead of hiring help. The guy who turned a barely working prototype into a multi-million-dollar logistics platform that now runs half their enterprise accounts. And now, I was just set in my ways. I didn't rage. Didn't slam the door or throw a stapler through the window, although, yeah, the thought occurred to me. Instead, I took the elevator down 34 floors, stepped out into the crisp October air, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not peace. Not freedom. More like a slow-burning clarity. You know that moment when you realize someone's been smiling to your face and stabbing you in the back for months? That cold, surgical kind of betrayal? Yeah, that was the flavor of the air that day. Truth is, I saw it coming. Carl stopped looping me into strategic meetings about 6 months before. My weekly syncs got bumped as needed. My team got broken up under a reorg they called talent optimization. What a phrase. A few of the younger devs I mentored, kids I taught from scratch, mind you, were suddenly reporting to Jeff Sampson, a smug little bastard fresh out of a startup with cloud-first innovation tattooed on his goddamn LinkedIn banner. Jeff's idea of architecture was pasting together open-source snippets and praying Kubernetes didn't eat them alive overnight. But Carl liked him. He wore tight slacks, knew how to say synergy with a straight face, and always talked about scale. So when the axe fell, I didn't ask why. I knew why. I was expensive, experienced, thoughtful. I didn't jump at every shiny new framework just because TechCrunch wrote about it. I believed in stability, in knowing the difference between clever and reliable. But reliable doesn't photograph well. You don't go viral for keeping things running. You go viral for disruption, even if it blows up in your face 2 quarters later. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was upset. Because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. A couple of the old team reached out. Tim, from Ops, said, "Man, I heard. Total BS. That place won't last a month without you." Jessica, my lead engineer for 4 years, sent a string of angry emojis and said Jeff asked her how our core auth system even worked. I didn't respond to either of them. Not yet. Instead, I sat in my kitchen, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, and opened my personal backup logs. See, they never really understood how much of that system had my hands on it. Not just the code. The architecture. The duct tape between services. The automation scripts that ran in the background, unnoticed, fixing things before they broke. The logging heuristics I built to predict failures based on user behavior. No one asked for it. I just built it. Because that's what grown-ass professionals do. They don't talk. They solve. Quietly. Effectively. Like goddamn clockwork. And Carl? Carl had just unplugged the clock. Now, let me ask you something. Be honest. If your manager shoved you out after 12 years, would you walk away or burn it all down? Because here's the thing. I didn't sabotage anything. Didn't delete a line of code. Didn't touch a server. All I did was leave. But I left with everything I knew, and no one, not Carl, not Jeff, not even the eager new hires writing Hello World in JavaScript, had a clue how deep my hands went into that machine. It wasn't just a platform. It was an ecosystem. And ecosystems don't like sudden change. Carl thought he was cutting out dead weight. But what he cut was the spine. And a system without a spine? It starts to twitch. Then it starts to fail. On my second day of freedom, I got a text from Tim again. Login system failed during peak hours. Jeff's panicking. I didn't reply. Just sipped my coffee and checked the headlines. Atticus Systems was preparing for a major IPO. Carl was set to be on stage in front of investors next month. Big promises. Bigger valuations. Everything riding on stability. Everything riding on the system. My system. And it had just started to creak. I closed the window on my browser. Opened my IDE. Not to code. Just to look. To remember. There were fingerprints in that architecture. Subtle ones. Not traps. Not bombs. Just absences. Little things I never documented because I never thought I'd need to. Because I was always there. But now I wasn't. And the house of cards had begun to lean. The first Monday after I was let go hit different, not in the romanticized, movie montage kind of way where the protagonist rediscovers joy over a morning jog or learns to bake bread or whatever else people do in fiction to heal their lives. No, I just woke up at 6:45 out of habit, made a cup of bitter, oversteeped French press coffee, and stared at the login screen to our internal admin panel like some sad old watchdog still sitting by the gate long after the family moved away. My credentials still worked, which didn't surprise me, because security hygiene was never Carl's strong suit. He figured offboarding was more of an HR concept than a systems necessity. So I checked the logs. Not because I was planning anything yet, not because I was bitter, though I absolutely was, but because 12 years of early morning crisis drills had hardwired something into me. You don't quit checking the heartbeat of something you built. You don't just flip the switch and walk away. Especially when you know the new guy has no idea what any of the blinking lights mean. Jeff Sampson, 29. CTO by title, influencer by instinct. I watched his first internal message get screenshotted and shared with me by an old dev buddy. It said something like, "Let's challenge legacy assumptions and shift toward cloud-native paradigms," which is the kind of word salad that gets applause from investors and blank stares from engineers who just want to know if they're rewriting the whole damn system or not. Jeff was exactly what Carl wanted. He wore logo hoodies to meetings, had strong opinions about container orchestration, and liked to say DevOps, like it was a religion instead of a working relationship between two exhausted departments. By Thursday of that first week, I'd already spotted 3 minor errors in the logs. Nothing catastrophic, just strange alerts that popped up like little whispers. A load balancer misbehaving on a cross-region failover. A stale cache in the user profile service not flushing correctly. Small stuff, the kind of thing I used to fix before breakfast without anyone ever knowing there'd been a problem. Now they lingered, and I could tell no one was even seeing them. That same day, Jessica, my former lead, texted me out of nowhere. "Hey, you remember that cron job you wrote to clean up the session tokens? Did we ever patch that memory leak?" I stared at the message for a while before responding. Then I didn't. I just locked my phone and went back to sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the logs pile up. I had no obligation to help anymore. No badge. No salary. No seat at the table. They made their choice. The next day, Tim from Ops sent me a screenshot of an error stack trace. No greeting. Just, "Did you ever see this in prod?" The trace was from a dependency chain that broke if Jeff's precious containerized microservice didn't properly initialize its environment variables in time, a problem I'd patched manually through a restart delay script he must have removed. I didn't reply to Tim either. I didn't have to. He was smart enough to figure it out eventually. Meanwhile, Carl was riding the social media wave like a man convinced he was heading for Fortune magazine's front cover. The official Atticus Systems LinkedIn posted a picture of Carl and Jeff shaking hands at some tech summit in Palo Alto, with the caption, "Exciting changes ahead, welcome our dynamic new CTO." The comments section was full of enthusiastic emojis and fake congratulations from investors and people who'd never touched a line of code in their lives. Carl looked 10 years younger in that photo, probably from the sheer joy of watching his long-term problem employee disappear without incident. No lawsuits. No LinkedIn tantrums. Just clean hands and a lighter payroll. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I had been the problem in the same way a foundation becomes a problem when you try to tear down and rebuild the house without checking what holds up the walls. Jeff was smart, sure, smart enough to impress VCs and give slick presentations with trendy buzzwords, but not nearly experienced enough to understand the slow, creeping rot of unmanaged infrastructure debt. He saw my work like an old car engine, functional but ugly, worth replacing with something faster and shinier. Problem was, shiny things break faster when you don't know how to maintain them. By the following week, I stopped actively checking the logs. I didn't have to. The errors started coming to me. Tim sent another message, this time with a hint of panic. "Did something change in the auth system?" Users reporting intermittent login failures. I stared at that message for a long while, then closed my phone again without replying. They were on their own now. Every line of code I'd written, every lazy workaround, every elegant fix, every buried patch was beginning to show its age without me there to nurture it. And while Jeff was off implementing some shiny serverless rollout and Carl was dreaming of ringing the bell at NASDAQ, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They were driving a Ferrari with a cracked axle. And no one left in that building even knew how to hear it rattling. The dumbest thing about smart people is how convinced they are that complexity equals competence. Jeff thought he was cleaning up. He thought he was evolving the system. But what he was doing, slowly, blindly, was poking holes in a balloon that had taken 12 years to fill. And I wasn't going to stop him. I didn't need to. All I had to do was watch. And smile. The funny thing about systems is that they remember you, even when the people who ran them forget. You can rip out code, replace modules, update infrastructure, shift to next-gen architecture, or whatever the latest acronym-heavy trend is, but the bones stay the same. And if you laid those bones in the first place, you can still hear them creak when something's about to break. By week 3 after my departure, that creaking had turned into groaning, and from the outside looking in, it was starting to sound like something was about to snap. It began, or at least, it began to be noticed, during a live client demo. A big logistics firm, one of the whales we'd onboard back in the day after a solid 18 months of chasing them, demoing to their CTOs, flying across the country to hold their hands through security audits. The kind of client you don't want pissed off. They were promised a smooth presentation of our new modular inventory tracking dashboard, something Jeff had slapped together using 4 open-source widgets and a few fancy PowerPoint animations. Halfway through the demo, the real-time data stream feeding into the UI froze. Then it lagged. Then it puked out a set of corrupted entries, including order IDs from entirely different clients. And then it just stopped. From what I heard, and I heard plenty, Jeff tried to blame it on network latency and unexpected load. But the client's own engineers knew that was crap. The data was compromised. Files had been written, partially overwritten, then pushed into an analytics pipeline without validation. A junior dev later told me off the record that someone had disabled a fallback script, one I had built to detect exactly this kind of partial failure, because, according to Jeff, it was legacy junk. That was the first spark. The second came the next day when one of our smaller vendors sent a legal threat over breach of data processing agreements. Apparently, their financial transaction logs had disappeared from our backups. Completely gone. Poof. Just like that. The job that ran nightly incremental syncs, the same one I'd maintained like clockwork for years, had been rerouted into a new cloud-based scheduler that skipped 2 crucial dependency checks. No one caught it. No one even noticed until the client asked why their invoices had reverted to last month's state. Carl, naturally, started scrambling. He brought in external consultants, a pair of smug, clipboard-wielding analysts from some high-dollar firm in San Francisco who showed up wearing startup hoodies and smug grins. They ran diagnostics. They pulled logs. They had meetings in meeting rooms. They requested root access. And after all of it, they concluded that the problems were deeply embedded in legacy logic. Which was code for, we have no idea what the hell is going on, but it smells old. Meanwhile, something else dropped into my lap, something I wasn't expecting, and something that flipped a switch inside me I didn't even realize was still wired to power. Jessica, bless her, had accidentally included me on an email thread where someone had attached an old Slack export. Just a system mistake. Apparently, they were trying to forward it to legal, and my name must have still been cached in her contact list. Inside that export was everything I needed to confirm a suspicion I'd had since the day I shook Carl's hand and walked out. Carl had been planning my removal for months. Not just thinking about it, actively working toward it. There were messages between him and Jeff dating back nearly half a year, where they discussed modernizing leadership, phasing out dependency on legacy staff, and this one really twisted the knife, cleaning house before the IPO window opens. Carl had always played the nice guy face-to-face. He had the dad joke charm, the empty praise, the weekly fake, "How are you holding up?" messages when we were under a crush of deadlines. But in private, he was already erasing me from the board like a piece of chalk on a whiteboard he didn't even write on. There were jokes in there too. Little snide jabs about me being grumpy, resistant to change, 1 foot in retirement already. Jeff even called me the ghost in the machine once as a joke. Said I haunted the architecture like an old spirit who refused to move on. That one stuck with me. Not because it was wrong, but because it was exactly right. I wasn't angry. I'd moved past anger. What I felt, sitting in my kitchen with that Slack file open, was something colder, cleaner. I felt justified. Because now I knew for certain it hadn't been a misunderstanding. It wasn't about strategy. It was personal. Carl had chosen to cut me out. Jeff had taken my job, dismantled my system, mocked my work behind my back. And now? Now they were reaping the chaos they'd sown without understanding where the roots even ran. So I started poking around again, not touching anything illegal. I didn't breach any systems, didn't alter any code on their servers. But I had copies of my own tools, simulations, sandbox models, environments I'd set up years ago for testing and iteration. And I began to revisit the places where I used to patch things, quietly, daily, invisibly. Little routines I'd written to cover gaps the product managers didn't even know existed. Cleanup bots, health checkers, scripts that massaged data into something usable when upstream systems farted mid-transmission. I had removed none of them on my way out. I simply let them stay where they were. But the moment someone decided they weren't necessary anymore, or refactored them out in the name of efficiency, well, that's when entropy did what entropy always does. I didn't sabotage a single thing. That's important to understand. I didn't create problems. I just stopped solving them. Jeff and Carl thought they could replace institutional knowledge with dashboards and modern tooling. They thought move fast and break things still worked in a production environment running real clients with real contracts and real consequences. But what they had was a Jenga tower built by a man who remembered which pieces squeaked, and they were pulling blocks blind, whistling as they went. I sat back, reopened my logs, and watched another pipeline flag a silent failure. This one would take a week to cause real damage. Maybe less, depending on how fast they noticed the discrepancies. And somewhere, buried in a Slack message neither of them remembered writing, I had been named the ghost in the machine. I intended to haunt them properly. The first real sign that Carl Bennett was panicking came on a Wednesday morning, about 3 weeks after the client demo debacle, when I got a breathless voicemail from Tim. The kind of message you leave when you don't know if someone will pick up, but you need to say it anyway. His voice cracked halfway through the second sentence, and all I caught was something about an emergency audit, security breach rumors, and they're asking questions about you. I didn't call him back, not right away. I just poured another cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, and started planning. Carl had finally realized what he was sitting on, not a pile of legacy code, but a tower of unknowns that only I truly understood. And now that it was falling apart, one module at a time, he was scrambling to pin the blame on someone other than the genius he hired to replace me. So, like any good coward, he turned his attention backward. He started pulling logs, ordering emergency code reviews, bringing in external penetration testers, and, most importantly, interrogating what was left of my team under the thin veil of a security debrief. They pulled Jessica into a 4-hour meeting where they grilled her about access logs, deployment histories, and every shell script I'd ever written. Tim told me they questioned him about whether I'd left behind any kill switches or malware triggers, which would have been laughable if it weren't so insulting. They were looking for a scapegoat, plain and simple. Carl needed someone to take the fall before the board got wind of the mounting failures and started asking where the hell all that Series C money had gone. But what Carl didn't know, what he never thought to consider, was that I had receipts. Literal ones. I'd spent over a decade at that company, and I documented everything. Not out of spite, not with any malicious intent, but because I believed in covering my ass. I kept logs, email chains, meeting notes. I archived Slack messages that seemed suspicious. I downloaded call summaries and stored backup copies of my own Git commits with timestamps and context. Most of it I never expected to use, until now. So I created a burner account. Simple Gmail alias. Brand new laptop. No connections to me. I even ran the messages through a VPN for good measure. Not because I was afraid of getting caught. I hadn't done anything illegal, but because I wanted the message to land like thunder without a return address. The first email went directly to the Internal Oversight Committee, which Carl had helped assemble himself when they started prepping for the IPO. It contained a very specific log file showing a GitHub pull request authored by Jeff Sampson, dated just 1 week after I was fired, in which he merged insecure, unvetted code lifted wholesale from a Stack Overflow thread into our payment gateway service. I attached side-by-side comparisons, highlighted the flaws, and quoted the part of the compliance handbook that explicitly forbade using unverified third-party code in production environments. No explanation, no signature, just the truth, wrapped in facts, and sent with a subject line that read, "For your due diligence before the next investor call." Within 48 hours, the internal alarms were going off like a casino jackpot. Carl convened an all-hands-on-deck meeting. I wasn't there, obviously, but I had ears on the inside. Jessica told me Jeff looked like he'd aged 5 years in one afternoon. He tried to defend the code, said it was temporary and just for testing, but the log showed it had been pushed live and had processed actual client transactions. Worse, the module had never been peer-reviewed. Carl's only response was to start shifting in his chair like a man who had just realized the chair was on fire. That's when I sent the thank you card. It wasn't to Carl, no, that would have been too obvious. I sent it to his assistant, Dana, a woman who had been nothing but kind to me for years, the kind who always remembered birthdays and brought in donuts when morale was low. Inside, I wrote a simple message. Thanks for all the smiles and calendars. Keep an eye on your inbox. It's about to get interesting. No name. No return address. Just a wink and a nudge. She'd figure it out. After that, it all unraveled faster than I could have hoped. Internal comms leaked. The board launched an independent review. Jeff was quietly asked to take a leave of absence, which is tech speak for go home and lawyer up. Carl, desperate to salvage what little control he had left, made the stupidest move he could have made. He tried to blame me directly. He issued a statement, not to the press, but internally, suggesting that a former employee may have deliberately withheld information vital to the stability of legacy infrastructure. It was a veiled accusation, phrased in the kind of corporate weasel speak that's designed to dodge lawsuits while still pointing the finger. But unfortunately for Carl, my receipts were thorough. You see, every one of those so-called withheld systems had documentation attached. Every script I'd written had been shared with the team. Every patch, every hotfix, every shortcut. It was all documented in JIRA tickets, email summaries, and version histories. If they'd bothered to read them, they would have known. But they didn't. Because Carl had spent the last year pushing me out of the circle and teaching everyone that the old dog's tricks weren't worth learning. I didn't sabotage anything. I just stopped saving them. There's a difference between pulling a plug and choosing not to plug a leak when you see one forming. I didn't introduce the rot. I stopped treating it like my job to hide it. By the end of that week, the IPO was postponed indefinitely. The lawyers were circling. Investors were demanding audits. People were jumping ship. Carl tried to spin it as a strategic pivot, a chance to refocus on core values. But anyone with a brain could see the truth. The engine had blown, and there was no one left who remembered how to fix it. And I was still sitting in my kitchen, drinking good coffee, and reading every leaked memo with a grin so wide it nearly cracked my face. The ghost in the machine had left the building. But the echoes? They were just getting started. The thing about collapse is that it doesn't always happen with fireworks or some dramatic explosion. Most of the time, it happens like a ceiling drip you ignored for too long until the whole drywall caves in one night while you're asleep. You think you have time, you think the noise isn't urgent, you think patchwork is progress, but eventually, the damage outruns the maintenance, and by the time anyone smells the mold, the foundation's already gone soft. On a rainy Monday morning in late November, I watched that ceiling fall. I was sitting at my kitchen table, same as always, the light coming in dull through the blinds, and the faint hum of my old fridge rattling behind me like a tired metronome. I had a tumbler of good whiskey in one hand, no occasion, just habit, and my laptop in front of me, where the stock ticker for Atticus Systems sat open and flickering in real time. At precisely 8:32, the value dropped 9% in under 5 minutes. At 8:36, it dropped another 4. Then it stopped updating entirely. I knew what had happened before I opened the other tabs. The core financial ops module had finally gone belly up. Not a warning, not a partial failure, not a slowdown, a full-blown, irrecoverable crash that locked out transaction processing across their entire enterprise suite. Thousands of clients, all frozen in place. Inventory systems that couldn't place orders. Vendors who couldn't get paid. Subscription billings that stopped renewing. The heart of the machine had seized, and the blood stopped moving. I didn't smile. That part always surprises people when I tell them. I didn't laugh, didn't toast the screen, didn't even lean back and feel victorious. I just watched the numbers bleed red and waited for the headlines to catch up. I had built that system, not alone, but with care and intention, and watching it go dark wasn't satisfying. It was sad in the way watching an old, neglected house burn down is sad. You know someone once cared for it. You know it didn't have to end like that. The first news alert hit just before 9. Atticus Systems halts transactions amidst technical crisis. IPO delayed again. The article was full of vague corporate statements and empty reassurances. Carl's name was still listed as CEO, but that didn't last long. By noon, a second update came in. Carl Bennett had officially resigned, citing health reasons and the need to prioritize family. Translation: the board finally had enough of his cowboy leadership style and booted him before the legal fallout grew teeth. I heard through a friend in finance that Carl cleaned out his desk the same afternoon and left the building without speaking a word to anyone. No goodbye email. No final spin. Just gone. Jeff, on the other hand, didn't resign. He vanished. No press statement. No internal memo. No stepping aside during this time. The guy just evaporated from the company's Slack, and when someone asked if he'd been fired, the HR rep apparently just blinked like she'd been handed a question in a foreign language. I assumed they cut a deal, or maybe he saw the writing on the wall and bailed before the regulators showed up. Either way, the great visionary CTO who replaced me didn't survive to see the fallout. A week later, I got a call I didn't expect. It was Jessica. She'd stayed longer than she should have, out of loyalty, or maybe just momentum. She said things had gone completely sideways. Auditors were camped in conference rooms. Clients were pulling contracts. The new CTO, an interim guy from a consultancy firm, was trying to figure out how much of the infrastructure was salvageable and how much would need to be rebuilt from scratch. They're treating your old code like it's ancient scripture, she said, and no one can read the language anymore. Then, after a long pause, she said, some people here are calling you a legend. That one hit me sideways. A legend. It was flattering in a weird, haunted kind of way. Like being the ghost story new hires tell in hushed tones when the system hiccups. This wouldn't have happened if Dan was still here. I didn't know whether to feel proud or cursed. Legends don't sleep. They don't live. They just linger, half-remembered and misquoted, until someone builds a statue or burns the whole myth down. Later that night, Tim texted me something shorter. Was it worth it? I didn't answer right away. I stared at the message on my cracked old phone screen, thumb hovering, mind spinning in circles. Was it worth it? To walk away with my name clean? To let the whole thing fail on its own weight? To prove, quietly, deliberately, and without a single broken law, that I had mattered more than they'd ever admit? I didn't burn the building down. I just stopped holding it up. That's the part people never seem to grasp, the difference between revenge and release. I didn't rig anything, didn't hack, didn't poison the well. I just walked away and took my knowledge with me, like a retired mechanic tossing the keys into the river. Let them find their own way around the rusted engine. But the truth? The truth is, I wasn't smiling when it all fell apart. There was a hollow feeling in my chest, not guilt, not exactly, but something close. Like I'd been waiting for a fireworks show that turned out to be a slow-motion car crash. I didn't want to see people lose jobs. Didn't want to hear Jessica talking about trying to find a new role in a sinking ship. I'd cared about those people. I still did. But I cared about myself more. And after 12 years of carrying a company that couldn't bother to carry me back, that's a trait I could live with. The final email I ever sent related to Atticus Systems went out the next morning. It was addressed to no one in particular, just an anonymous tip forwarded to a tech journalist I liked, someone who cared more about truth than spin. The subject line read, Ghost in the Machine, How Legacy Knowledge Died. The article went viral 3 days later. I never gave a quote, never confirmed my identity. I just watched the internet do what it does best, connect dots, speculate, assign blame, and crown unlikely heroes. And me? I shut the laptop, poured another drink, looked out the window at a gray sky, and thought about what came next. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't sure who I was now, but I was free, and that had to count for something.